Oh, there we go. Hi.
Hi,
How are you?
sorry. It sent me into some weird requesting mic access zone. Apologies, and I had to go back on.
Literally every day there's something with this. It's this imperfect science of
Yeah.
not even a science, this imperfect medium, but it's been fun for, while it's lasted.
So sorry. I was like, oh no. So
I don't know.
hi.
The worst part is I can feel the stress knowing, having been on the other side, the stress of like not being able to figure it out and like, oh my gosh. So I get it. So I don't stress at all on this side, and I know that it'll all work out. So, Catherine, so how did you become the artistic director of The Moth? Tell me about this latest book, which actually I have and I've seen and I've read and everything. So tell me your whole story.
So I've been at the Moth 18 years. Can you believe
Wow.
it? I was a huge fan. I moved to New York City in 2000 and started going to the shows. The shows are people telling true stories from their life on stage. At the time, I was working in the film industry where it was just like a lot of people to tell a story. And so the appeal to me, like going and just seeing a single person telling a story that happened to them, it was just so simple. The lights, the sound, it was all very simple. And I fell madly in love with it and became obsessed and started coming to every show. And then eventually one of the two employees quit. And I was like, me, pick me. And I went there and I've been there ever since. So yeah,
Wow.
it's definitely a
So tell
labor of
me
love.
about how did that, so wait, now keep the story going. So you you
Yeah.
you said me, and then what happened? How did you go from there to here? Like what's happened over the last 18 years, and have you contributed
So
your own stories? Like just tell me a little more about that journey. It's so interesting to me.
yeah, so actually early on, I was the producer at first, and I told a story on the main stage as part of that process. And now I'm so glad that I did because when I've now coached about hundreds of people telling their stories. It's so nice to be able to say, yes, I've done it, and you'll survive. And it is terrifying, but it's also exhilarating and such an honor to to be in front of the Moth audience. I feel like we have the greatest audience in the world. We always feel so blessed. And so in the beginning, it was just live shows, and then eventually when podcasting came out, we were pretty early adopters. I just heard yesterday that there's over 1 million podcasts. But when we were on iTunes first, there was only 10,000, which seemed like a
Wow.
lot, at the time. So we had a podcast, and then eventually that led us to having a public radio show. And then in 2012, we started talking about doing books. And at first I was resistant because one of the big things of the Moth is you're not allowed to have notes. So it's like, it's so unmoth to write something down. But over the course of doing the radio show, we would get the stories transcribed sometimes to make little trims, because you have to make every radio show has to be exactly 53 minutes. And so we were reading them and we're like, wow, some of these really pop on the page. And so Daniel Greenberg, who had just been coming to them off for years, who's now our agent, he is a literary agent, and he was like, Catherine, what if you took the transcriptions and just really lightly edited them, like edit them in a way that preserves a live voice. And actually, one of the interesting things is our very first editor, we got into a little thing because a lot of the storytellers actually jump through different tenses in a 10-minute story, which is not something you would normally do if you were writing. And we discovered that, like, if you tried to edit the tenses out into one uniform tense, it kind of crushed the liveness out of them. So
Hmm.
one of the interesting things in the book is that people often will start in the past tense and then they will jump into the present tense when they get to a really intense moment, almost like they use the present tense like a zoom lens, which is sort of interesting. I feel like I can nerd out with you because it's like, with like
I think that's
readers
so
and things.
cool. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I think that's so, I love it. Keep going.
So we took cool. So yeah,
That's
so we
so
took
neat.
we took a stab at it. The first book came out in 2013 and did really well. And we're now on our third book. And it's fun. It's like sort of a different way to experience the stories. We find that a lot of people, there are people who will read a story who might not want to listen to public radio or who might not want to listen to a podcast. And there's something really beautiful about the books because you're literally holding the stories in your hands. And there's something kind of magical about that. And, so we're always about finding any way it's like a new way to get these stories out. We all consider ourselves like ambassadors of the stories.
I love that. Ambassador of the story. Wow.
Yeah.
So when you told your story on stage, what was it about?
It was about the time that I accidentally drove my very dear friend's car off a small cliff from the passenger seat.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Totally. And so, amazingly, I was fine. The car was fine, which is crazy because it took two like uh, cranes like to pull it up and off. But yeah, so that's where I started. You know, it was like this crazy, just a crazy, wacky thing that happened, and but it, you know, it led me into this whole other life, and which has been really exciting. I feel very lucky.
So what makes something a moth story versus like not a moth story? Is there something mothy about it or?
Yeah, well, I mean, the stories need to be true. I mean, we can't afford the New Yorkers fact checking team, but the stories need to be true. It needs to have happened to you. Like, you know, we always say, like, you know, your grandmother's story is beautiful, but like, unless it kind of ties into you and your story, that's one of the things that makes things particularly mothy. The stories are also like limited with time. Like, they need to be told in like 10 to 12 minutes. Occasionally, they go a little bit longer, but usually not. And so people work pretty hard on their stories. The stories aren't memorized, but 10 minutes goes by really fast. So people tend to work out in advance, like what um, you know, the beats, so that when they get on stage, you just want people to be really confident and know where they're going once they're up in front of a live audience. Because of course, the second you walk out at first, it's that very first moment that can be a little bit scary. But then we have such an amazing audience, and I feel like the audience kind of always rises up and sort of lifts people up. And people usually walk out on stage and say that if they could, they'd turn right back on around and go back on stage and do it again.
Wow. So how often are you doing what? Well, you aren't doing them now, obviously, because we can't do anything now. So, but
Yeah,
before, how often would there be a moth show? Because aren't they all over the place too?
they are. Yeah, they're in the regular shows were in 30 cities before all this went down, and we were doing over 600 shows a year. And now
Wow.
we've actually moved everything virtual, which, you know, was definitely like a choice. We were doing virtual main stages. It's going to be about once or twice a month. I think we're going to do them by time zones. Like, we'll do one for the Pacific Coast, one for the East Coast, and then one that hits, you know, Europe and Africa, because we do a lot of work in Africa. So we're about to roll all of those out. We've done some experiments. We've also moved our open mic story slam competitions where anyone can go and, you know, now raise their hand in Zoom, be picked to tell a story. We did our first one last night with the Atlanta crew, and it was really fun. So it's all been a massive experiment. And, you know, the next week, we normally, on Tuesday night would normally be our fundraiser, which we call the Mothball, which we do every year. It's like a really fun party, but we've also moved that online. And we're doing a thing called Hidden Treasures, where a lot of like celebrities, you know, in many cases, like both, you know, full on, anyone would recognize them as celebrities. People like, you know, Hassan Minaj, Roseanne Cash, Padma Lakshmi, like all kinds of wonderful people, but also like moth celebrities, people who've told a million moth stories and that people in our community just adore. 21 people are going to be live in their homes showing beloved objects and like telling a story about an object in their home. So we'll see how that goes, but we're excited. It's Tuesday night.
It sounds like you successfully pivoted during this time. I feel like that's the
We're
key to.
trying. We're trying.
I
We're
know.
challenged.
So, what do you think makes a good
It's been
story?
kind of fun. I always say that the number one quality of a great moth storyteller is actually their willingness to be vulnerable. Like, the best stories are not about how we save the day. The best stories are usually about how we messed up or stumbled or struggled. You know, a decision we needed to make that maybe we felt like was a really hard decision, and maybe we didn't make the right decision and regretted that, or, you know, experienced it. That somebody is willing to go on there and talk about, as we sometimes say, their boo-boo, or like the things that went wrong. That is the thing that is most relatable, I think. I mean, our missteps are what make us interesting. So I think if you're trying to think about a moth story, think about the times when you struggle with something. And often I think a lot of great stories come out of that.
I would not even know where to start with my list of things I have messed up. I could tell moth stories from now until like the dawn of time. So,
Oh, me too. And all of us. And I think that's why we love doing what we do, because we're like, oh, me too. We always find that, you know, that what's interesting about moth stories is that the more specific to you are, the more universal it becomes counterintuitively. And I'm sure that's true, like novels, you know, that when you get into the specifics, you're like, oh, you find ways to connect in with it, which is very cool. And it feels really important right now. You know, we're all kind of living in our little boxes, surrounded by our immediate families or our roommates. You know, we're all a little isolated right now. And so stories, it feels really important. I'll also say that a lot of people are telling me they're struggling to read right now because they feel a little scattered. And and so one of the things about the moth books is that each story, like a 10-12 minute story, when you read it, is at most 5 minutes. My lovely partner, our executive director, Sarah, refers to them as literary potato chips. So you can pick up a book and just read a single story, and they're very digestible. And I feel like it's a nice thing for right now when I think a lot of us are feeling a little discombobulated.
Totally. Well, that's great. I love your way of ushering stories into the world, and how books are a part of it, but they're just like an offshoot of the old-fashioned way of just one person sharing a story with another. It's just really amazing. So anyway, it was so nice to chat with you.
It was nice to chat with you. Yeah, sorry again.
I feel like we could keep talking books for much longer than this. So hopefully we will.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.